Hello. Today we are going to discuss the first chapter of Flamingo, one of the textbooks prescribed for 12th grade students studying in CBSE board. The title of the chapter is The Last Lesson. Yes, don't be shocked on listening to the title because I've just mentioned that it happens to be the first chapter in Flamingo book, yet the title of the chapter is The Last Lesson. It will be crystal clear as we go to the story, as we read the story, and as we come to the end, we shall understand it clearly why the title of the chapter is The Last Lesson. But before that, a few words about its author. It's written by a French novelist, a French short story writer. His name was Alphonse Daudet. Now, Alphonse Daudet is famous for creating short stories and novels that are filled with charming mixture of realism, humor, and sentiment. Yes, the present story that we are going to discuss also is no exception. This is also filled with sentimental feelings, emotional state of mind, and so on. Besides, a few words about the historical background, since the historical background is mandatory for this chapter to help us understand better. Now, the last lesson is set in the days of Franco-Prussian War that was fought from 1870 to 1871. To be precise, it was fought from 19th July 1870 to 28th of January 1871. Now, why did I mention it? Because it has something to do with this chapter. The war was fought between France and Prussia, as the name of the war itself suggests. It is a Franco-Prussian war. So it was fought between France and Prussia. In those days, Prussia consisted of what are now the nations of Germany, Poland, and parts of Austria. Now, in the war, France was defeated. France lost the war. And according to an order from Berlin, French would never be taught in this school. They would have to learn German. Now, this war and the defeat of France had such a deep impact in the mind of the writer that he came out with this story. I have even come across in some of the versions that Daudet enlisted in the army to fight the Franco-Prussian War. And France's defeat had a profound impact on Daudet in his mind. Well, whether he fought in the war or not doesn't matter, but one thing is very sure, that since he was an eyewitness, he might have fought or he might not have, but since he was an eyewitness to the war, it left a very lasting impression, it left a very deep impact in his mind, that he came out with this story, The Last Lesson. With this background, if we try to understand this chapter, this lesson, it will be easy for us to understand. Now, let's look into the chapter. Let's see what happens in this chapter. Now, this whole chapter is the first person narrative of a school going boy. The name of the boy is Franz, F-R-A-N-Z. It is Franz. Now, there are two main characters in the story. One is the boy who is named Franz, and the other one is M. Hamel, who is the teacher at the school. Let's see what happens in this story. Little Franz, a school-going boy, hurries off to school. He is getting late to school and he is in a hurry to reach the school. He is the actually narrator of the story. Now, having got late to school one morning, Franz, as he was rushing, many things were going through his mind. He was fearful that M. Hamel would scold him for not completing his lessons, because he had been given a piece of homework by his teacher M. Hamel to prepare lessons on French lessons on participle, and he had not prepared it as usual. He was not a very sincere student. If you go through the text, you will understand it. He was not a very sincere student. So he was afraid that he would be punished by his teacher M. Hamel. So he even contemplated running away from school and going elsewhere, spending the time outdoors. But somehow he overcame his temptation and he decided to go to school. As he was rushing towards his school, he happened to see at a public square, people had gathered near a bulletin board, a notice board. Something had been displayed there. And Franz was afraid. I don't know what it could be this time. He wondered, he thought what it could be this time. Because for the past many years, for the past at least 2 years, all their bad news had come from there only. So he was just wondering what the bad news could be this time. Yet he had no time to stand and stare, so he just went on to his school. He kept on his walk, he kept on moving towards school. Unlike other days, the school was very calm and quiet. Other days, it used to be, they used to be highly, the school used to be in a state of commotion, confusion. There used to be a great commotion caused by opening and closing of, desks. If you have the book, if you have the NCERT book, please turn with me to page number 3. You will find one of the paragraphs starting like this. Usually, when school began, there was a great bustle which could be heard out in the street, the opening and closing of desks, lessons repeated in unison, very loud, with our hands over our ears to understand better, and the teacher's great ruler rapping on the table. So it was the usual practice when Franz went to the school, he used to witness or he saw that. But today, nothing of this sort happened. Franz had planned that he would sneak into the classroom, taking advantage of the commotion as it usually happened. But to his surprise, when he peeped through the window, what he saw his classmates already sitting in their seats, having taken their positions, and M. Hamel was just walking to and fro. This sight was highly, it could not be accepted by Franz. He could not believe it. He could not accept it. He understood that something was unusual. Franz opened the door. He was embarrassed. He was frightened. He thought that he would be scolded. But M. Hamel looked so calm and quiet. He looked relaxed. And what he told him was to go and take his position, to take his seat. When Franz sat, it was at that time he noticed that his teacher had dressed formally. A pair of dress that he usually wore on formal occasions. See what is written in one of the paragraphs. Our teacher had on his beautiful green coat, his frilled shirt, and the little black silk cap, all embroidered, that he never wore except on inspection and prize days. That means he wore only on formal occasions. Other than this, what Franz was surprised to notice was that he noticed a few villagers sitting on the back benches that usually used to be, vacant. Who were sitting there? The old Hauser was sitting, the former mayor was sitting, the former postmaster, and several others. So it was quite unusual. It was not usual for Franz to see such a sight on a normal school day. Then what happens? As he sat, M. Hamel announces. Now it was something that was not expected by especially this little boy Franz. What did he announce? He announced that there was an order from Berlin that French would not be taught anymore, and what would be taught? Only German would be taught in the schools of Alsace and Lorraine. Now these words were like a thunderclap to the boy. If you go through the chapter, you will find that what a thunderclap these words were to me. He was shocked to hear such news, and then he realized, okay, so this was the news that had been displayed on the bulletin board as I was walking or as I was coming to town. He understood that they had displayed this news. Now, Franz barely or hardly knew, French, his own, language, but he could not. It was sad that he could not get a chance to learn it anymore. Strangely, he was sorry also for not learning his lessons. A boy, a student who had never put in his best efforts to learn his language, now he was feeling sorry that the time has gone and he would not be able to learn it anymore. His books that had seemed such a burden just a while ago, it all seemed precious to him. He felt even sad that M. Hamel was going to leave him. He was going to leave all of them, including the villagers. All these thoughts were striking in his mind. Franz realized that it was because of this reason that the villagers were sitting there. Mainly because of two reasons. First, they were sorry that they had not gone to school for longer. And secondly, they wanted to thank M. Hamel for the 40 years of service that he had done, that he had done in his village. Just then what happens? M. Hamel asks Franz to recite his lesson. Franz could not pronounce the words. He was feeling very nervous. He could not complete his task. He could not live up to the expectation of M. Hamel, his teacher. He expected M. Hamel to scold him, but it did not happen. To his surprise, M. Hamel reasoned that Franz must be feeling sorry himself. He must be feeling terrible himself for not learning his lessons, as he had no longer a chance to learn French anymore. Franz's identity as a French man was challenged because he could not write his language, he could not read his language. Then what happens? M. Hamel blames everyone for the situation that is at the moment, that is at present. He blames at least two persons. First, he blames the parents. He blames them for not sending their children to school. See what he says in one of the paragraphs. Your parents were not anxious enough to have you learn. They preferred to put you to work on a farm or at the mills. So it was the fault of the parents. They just wanted to send their children to some farm, maybe to earn some money. So it was their fault, first of all. Now, secondly, and very important, M. Hamel even realizes his own fault. He doesn't justify himself. He accepts his fault. I think it is a very important lesson that not just students, but even we teachers ought to learn. Whenever we are wrong, we ought to accept, yes, here is the place that we are wrong. Now, what does he blame? He blames himself for sending Franz to water his flowers instead of having him learn his lessons. Moreover, he was also sorry for giving them a day off whenever he wanted to go fishing. See what he says. Have I not often sent you to water my flowers instead of learning your lessons? So he blames himself for sending Franz to water his plants. When I wanted to go fishing, did I not just give you a holiday? So he blames everyone for the situation. He doesn't justify his own acts. Then he goes on to describe that after all this, M. Hamel goes on to describe that French is the most beautiful, the clearest language in the world. He also says that as far as people hold fast to their own language, it will be quite useful, it will be very useful when they are enslaved. When M. Hamel was teaching grammar for the last time, Franz was surprised that he was able to understand everything clearly. It was quite strange. It appeared as though even Franz was able to understand things much clearly, and moreover, even M. Hamel was teaching in a more appropriate manner than what he had been doing so far. He realized that earlier neither he listened carefully nor had his teacher taught it so perfectly. Dear friends, don't you think the same thing happens sometimes when the examination approaches? When the examination is close by, sometimes we tend to understand things in a much faster way. Even if a teacher or elders or elder brothers or sisters, if they just give one small hint, we tend to understand things at a much faster rate, and we think that we ought to have understood it much earlier. The same thing happens with Franz. Then they had a lesson in writing after this grammar lesson. M. Hamel gave them copies on which it was written France Alsace in a beautiful handwriting. Now everyone was doing things very quietly. Franz was wondering. There were many things that going through the minds of Franz. He was wondering whether they are going to make these pigeons also on the roof to sing in German. See, what an irony, and what a feeling that he has, or what a feeling that he is going through. He could hear the sounds of the pigeons, and he is thinking, I don't know, I wonder if they are going to make these pigeons also sing in German. Franz looked and saw M. Hamel sitting motionless in his chair. Now we are coming to the climax. It seemed as though he was looking at everything in the classroom. He wanted to have a last glance at the things that he could see. He wanted to retain things in his mind. He was determined to teach till the very last moment that he could. Then after the writing class, they had a lesson in history. Franz noticed that the old Hauser had put on his spectacles. The same Hauser, one of the villagers, who was sitting at the last bench. Hauser had put on his spectacles and was trying to spell the letters. He could see him crying, and his voice had trembled with emotion. And it was not the condition only of the old Hauser, but of everyone who was sitting on the benches, the villagers. Now we are coming to the end of the story. At 12 it was time for the class to get over. They heard the trumpets of the Prussian soldiers, returning from the drill. M. Hamel stood up. He knew that the moment had come when he had to bid adieu to his class, when he had to leave. He could no longer continue his 40 years of the service. So he just stood up. He wanted to say something, but his voice was choked. He was not feeling like, his sound just could not come out. He took a piece of chalk, and what did he do? He just wrote it on the board. Vive la France. Maybe we can translate it as Hurrah for France, or Long live France, or Victory for France. And then he even could not ask the class to go away. He could not express that the class had got over. What did he do? He simply got up and motioned to them to go away as the class had come to an end. So this is how our chapter, the last lesson, comes to an end. I'm sure you must have understood. But one question, let me leave it to you. What is the reason, although the title of the chapter is the last lesson, it is given as the first lesson in the book? It could very well have been given at the end of the book, so that as the academic session in any school comes to an end, the teacher and the students could have become highly emotional. They could have discussed, they could have shared many valuable moments. Why isn't it given at the end of the book, rather as the first chapter in this book, Flamingo? Let me know in the comment section. And if any further discussion is needed, probably or hopefully we shall do it in upcoming videos. Thanks for watching.